Ryan Reynolds here for Mint Mobile. One of the perks about having 4 kids that you know about is actually getting a direct line to the big man up north. And this year, he wants you to know the best gift that you can give someone is the gift of Mint Mobile's unlimited wireless for $15 a month. Now, you don't even need to wrap it. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited. See mintmobile.com for details.
Hey, it's Austin James. Yes, I'm living with diabetes, but it doesn't have to define me. Thanks to the Freestyle Libre 3 Plus sensor, I get real-time glucose readings throughout the day. The Freestyle Libre 3 Plus sensor is small and easy to wear, giving me the freedom to focus on my life as a parent and a musician. Now this is progress. You can get a free sensor at freestylelibre.us.
Offer available for people who qualify. Visit myfreestyle.us to see all terms and conditions. Certain exclusions apply. Data on file. Abbott Diabetes Care. For prescription only. Safety info found at freestylelibre.us.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. The holidays mean more travel, more shopping, more time online, and more personal info in places that could expose you to identity theft. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points every second. If your identity is stolen, their US-based restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Get more holiday fun and less holiday worry with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Subtle results, still you, but with fewer lines. Botox Cosmetic, out of botulinum toxin A, is a prescription medicine used to temporarily make moderate to severe frown lines, crow's feet, and forehead lines look better in adults.
Effects of Botox Cosmetic may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness may be a sign of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Don't receive Botox Cosmetic if you have a skin infection. Side effects may include allergic reactions, injection site pain, headache, eyebrow and eyelid drooping, and eyelid swelling. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Tell your doctor about medical history, muscle or nerve conditions including ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis, or Lambert-Eaton syndrome, and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects. For full safety information, visit BotoxCosmetic.com or call 877-351-0300.
See for yourself at BotoxCosmetic.com.
Thanks for listening to the Red Treehouse, where I tell scary stories to keep you up at night. You can listen to the Red Treehouse on your favorite streaming platforms, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Be sure to follow, like, and subscribe. Oh, and leave a 5-star review. You can follow the Red Treehouse on social media, on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, X, Threads, and Facebook at Red Treehouse Pod. And now you can find the Red Treehouse on Patreon. Join the Red Treehouse community for as little as $3 per month and receive exclusive member benefits. Simply go to patreon.com/Red Treehouse. As always, if you have a scary story or topic you'd like me to feature on an upcoming episode, email redtreehousepod@gmail.com. Important note: sources for this episode can be found in the show notes. The Red Treehouse is dedicated to my dad. I love you, Pop. Before we begin our episode, I wanted to give a shout out to my son, Will, for his help with researching, writing, and recording this episode of the Red Treehouse. The voice you're about to hear is his, as he introduces us to the Montauk Project.
According to Britannica, a conspiracy theory is defined as, quote, an attempt to explain harmful or tragic events as the result of the actions of a small, powerful group, end quote. It's near impossible to determine the number of conspiracy theories floating around, but I suspect each of us, to varying degrees and of varying consequence, believe in some sort of conspiracy theory. A fascinating study published by the American Psychological Association stated, quote, researchers found that overall, people were motivated to believe in conspiracy theories by a need to understand and feel safe in their environment. and a need to feel like the community they identify with is superior to others." End quote. Some of the most famous conspiracy theories include the assassination of President John F. Kennedy in the 1969 Apollo moon landings. And while many conspiracy theories make for harmless debate and banter, others are more insidious and dangerous. In 1992, Preston Nichols published the first in a series of books entitled The Montauk Project, in which he alleged the United States government conducted top-secret experiments, quote, "for the purpose of developing psychological warfare techniques and exotic research including time travel," end quote. And that's not all. Nichols also claimed the experiments involved teleportation, mind control, and contact with extraterrestrial life. It sounds like something out of a science fiction novel, and Preston Nichols' book is categorized as science fiction, except he stoked the fires and blurred the lines between reality and fiction by writing, quote, "Whether you read this as science fiction or non-fiction, you are in for an amazing story," end quote. And did you know the hit television series Stranger Things is loosely based on the Montauk Project? In this episode of the Red Treehouse, we're going to explore the strange case of the Montauk Project. Was the United States government really conducting top-secret tests on unsuspecting subjects, or is this another case of a conspiracy theory gone wild? I'll share the details. You decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Welcome to the Red Treehouse.
The early 1980s was a tumultuous time in the United States. The economy was in a recession. The Iran-Contra scandal was brewing. The Satanic Panic was well underway. And the country was locked in the Cold War with the then Soviet Union. Tensions were brewing, and government mistrust was arguably at an all-time high, creating fertile soil for a harrowing conspiracy theory to take root. Less than 120 miles east of New York City lies Montauk, a small village on the far east end of Long Island. A popular tourist destination with 6 state parks and desirable beaches, Montauk had a population of just over 4,000 people in 2022, home to Montauk Point Light, the 4th oldest active lighthouse in the United States. This small hamlet is famous for its fishing and, quote, claims to have more world saltwater fishing records than any other port in the world, end quote. Truly, Montauk sounds like a beautiful place to live. But, according to Preston Nichols, beneath the idyllic surface lies a terrifying secret. For decades, Montauk was used as a base for most branches of the United States military. The Montauk Air Force Station, also known as Camp Hero, was commissioned by the U.S. Army in 1942 to serve as a defense post against an invasion of New York from the Atlantic. This makes good sense, considering the United States entered World War II in late 1941 after the attack on Pearl Harbor. Except Preston Nichols claimed Camp Hero was the site of the United States government's research into the paranormal. Something interesting, Preston Nichols wasn't the first to claim the U.S. government was conducting illicit research on Montauk. Rumors had been circulating for years before his claim. But while he may not have started the conspiracy theory, His book certainly helped propel it forward. According to his book, The Montauk Project, Nichols' story began in 1971. He stated, quote, "I began working for BJM. BJM is a fictitious name for the company I worked for, a well-known defense contractor on Long Island. Through the years, I got a degree in electrical engineering and became a specialist in electromagnetic phenomena. Although I was not interested in the paranormal at that time, I had obtained a grant to study mental telepathy and to determine whether or not it existed." End quote. Mental telepathy is, quote, "the ability to communicate thoughts between minds without using the senses." End quote. According to Nichols, he was surprised to discover what he termed a telepathic wave, which he described as having the characteristics of a radio wave, despite having differences. He claimed to have discovered, quote, "a whole brand new electromagnetic function that was not in any of the textbooks I'd ever seen." End quote. To substantiate his discovery, Nichols collaborated with various psychics, and in 1974, he noticed an interesting pattern. Every day at the same time, the psychics' minds would be jammed, and they had difficulty thinking. Suspecting the mental difficulties were the result of an electric signal, Nichols, quote, "used my radio equipment and correlated what came on over the airwaves at the times the psychics were non-functional." End quote. Nichols decided to trace the signal, which took him to the radar antenna at Montauk Point. Despite being convinced the radar antenna was responsible for the psychic's mental jamming, Nichols could not continue his research until 10 years later, in 1984, when he was informed by a friend that the base was abandoned.
With Uber Reserve, good things come to those who plan ahead. Family vacay? Reserve your ride as soon as you book your flights. To all the planners, now you can reserve your Uber ride up to 90 days in advance. See Uber app for details.
According to Nichols, he arrived at the former military installation and found debris scattered all over. And he noticed something else: high-voltage radio equipment. He reached out to the Surplus Disposal Agency to see if he could purchase some of the equipment, and after several weeks of waiting, he was given the contact information to a mysterious person, who he referred to in his book as John Smith. He was told there was no record of anyone owning the equipment, and that he was free to take what he wanted. He was given a slip of paper, and instructed to show it to, quote, "anyone who might question my presence in the area." End quote. Within a few days, Nichols went back to Montauk Point, where he met a caretaker, Mr. Anderson. He showed Mr. Anderson the slip of paper, and was given permission to take what he wanted. Something interesting. During this excursion back to Montauk Point, Nichols was accompanied by a man named Brian, who he described, quote, "as a psychic who helped me with my research." End quote. Initially, the two split up, but as they reconnected, Brian complained that he was, quote, "feeling some very funny vibrations." End quote. Nichols had him take a psychic reading, which produced interesting results. Brian, quote, "spoke of irregular weather patterns, mind control, and a vicious beast." End quote. Sometime after his visit to Montauk, a man named Duncan Cameron arrived at Preston Nichols' lab, asking for help with audio equipment. It didn't take long for Nichols to become suspicious of Duncan, and he insisted on a test. He took Duncan to the Montauk Air Force Base to see if he recognized it. To Nichols' shock, Duncan explained the purpose of every building on the grounds, and it seemed as though Duncan had been there before and was intimately familiar with the goings-on. When he entered the transmitter building, Duncan, quote, suddenly went into a trance and began spitting out information, end quote. Nichols took him back to the lab, where he helped unblock Duncan's memories. And in doing so, he uncovered a horrifying secret. Duncan recalled being a test subject held somewhere on the grounds of the Air Force Base. And not only that, Duncan claimed he had been sent to meet with Nichols, earn his trust, and kill him and blow up his lab. Shortly after Duncan revealed his plan, Nichols recalled his own suppressed memories about his participation in the Montauk Project. In fact, he believed he, quote, must have been existing on 2 separate time tracks, end quote. He sought to find answers through technology and his own gut reactions. He recalled experiences in his alternate reality, and on one occasion, he had a hunch that he might be able to travel into a high-security area, an area he didn't have clearance to access. He recalled this event, stating, quote, I simply went in and gave him my badge from the lesser area. And what do you know? He gave me a badge with my name on it. I'd had a hunch and it worked. I walked around and let the churning in my gut determine what direction I should go in. Eventually, Nichols came to an office with a large desk inside. The nameplate on the desk read, Preston B. Nichols, Assistant Project Director. And for the first time, he had incontrovertible proof that he was part of the Montauk Project. Despite this recollection, he quickly acknowledged being under an agreement which would not allow him to speak about the project for 30 years. Sometime in 1991, Nichols was laid off from BJM, effectively cutting off access to sources and resources pointing to the Montauk Project. But that didn't stop Preston Nichols from divulging seemingly top-secret information. First, he mentioned the Phoenix Project, which was a government program to control the weather. Then, he mentioned Project Rainbow, which was the code name for the Philadelphia experiment. And though he claimed both projects were eventually defunded by the government, he insisted both continued beyond their expiration dates. After the programs were decommissioned, a company called Brookhaven National Laboratory moved into Montauk Point and took over the programs, combining the two into the newly formed and renamed Montauk Project. This new project sought to experiment in mind control, telekinesis, and contact with extraterrestrials. And while officials gathered unsuspecting test subjects from the surrounding area, the primary test subject was Duncan Cameron. Nichols detailed the mind control experiment. Quote, first, they'd sit someone in the chair. Then they would open and close the door to determine how much UHF and microwave energy was getting into the room. At the same time, the transmitter was blasting gigawatts of power. They experimented by running the transmitter at different pulse widths, different pulse rates, and different frequencies. They tried everything they could think of. They just wanted to see what would happen to the person in the chair if he was bombarded by X frequency, pulse, etc. They observed that certain changes made a person sleep, cry, laugh, be agitated, and so on. End quote. Nichols claimed that at a certain frequency, researchers obtained a view into the human mind. He also claimed the experiments took a significant toll on Duncan Cameron's body, and that by the late 1980s, he had significant scar tissue in his lungs and was brain dead. But according to Nichols, within a few years of research and collecting data, the US government developed a mind control device. As the experiments continued, scientists discovered Duncan Cameron could bend time. Except there was something interesting. If Duncan thought about something at a specific time, what he thought about would not happen for several hours. Despite proving his psychic powers, Duncan Cameron also demonstrated the ability to warp time. Researchers decided to calibrate Duncan, meaning they, quote, had to adjust and modify the equipment to synchronize with him, end quote. According to Nichols, scientists successfully opened a time portal, one that existed if Duncan Cameron was concentrating on the specific time frame. With this completed, researchers' attention now turned to time travel. What good was opening a time portal if you could not travel through it? The vortex created by Duncan Cameron intrigued scientists who desired to move between eras, and according to Nichols, quote, the tunnel resembled a corkscrew, with an effect similar to lit bulbs. There, you would meet somebody, or do something. You would complete your mission and return. The tunnel would open for you, and you would come back to where you came from, end quote. But here's the thing. This only worked if the power remained on. If for any reason the power was cut off, the traveler would be lost in time, or abandoned in the vortex. Nichols claimed he was responsible for ensuring everything stayed working and functional. But there's something else. Preston Nichols also claimed thousands of people were abandoned, quote, somewhere in the future, maybe 200 or 300 years ahead, end quote. Then, on August 12, 1983, something terrifying happened. After being ordered to run the transmitter non-stop on August 5th, the equipment experienced a sort of glitch. At one point, Duncan Cameron appeared, but the version from 1943, not 1983. Fearful of what they'd unleashed, researchers sought to end the experiment. But an unidentified someone approached Duncan while he was sitting in the chair and whispered, "The time is now." Almost immediately, Duncan Cameron unleashed a monster buried deep in his subconscious. Nichols described the monster as, quote, big, hairy, hungry, and nasty, end quote. Eyewitness testimony of the monster is unreliable at best. Some described it as 9 feet tall, others 30 feet tall. Scrambling and terrified, officials cut the power to the main machine. But to their horror, the monster didn't disappear. Preston Nichols, though, took matters into his own hands and began cutting wires, and after a short time, the monster disappeared, and the time portal closed. Soon after, the Montauk Project was shut down, and one by one, the researchers were hunted down to have their memories wiped away. Preston Nichols believes his memories were wiped clean, and he was sent back in time to an alternate reality, a reality completely detached from the Montauk Project. In 1992, he released his book, entitled The Montauk Project, which you can find a copy of in the show notes. But did the Montauk Project actually happen? General consensus seems to be that Preston Nichols' book is entirely fiction, and that Duncan Cameron was not a real person. But there's something interesting. Brookhaven National Laboratory does in fact exist, and is overseen by the Department of Energy. I'll admit, this case truly baffles me. On the one hand, the details read like an engaging science fiction novel. But on the other hand, there is some room for the possibility that the Montauk Project was a real-life, top-secret government program. But here's the thing. If the Montauk Project is fiction, there's no harm in it. But if it's true, then it's terrifying. And I think that's what makes conspiracy theories so alluring for some. It can make for interesting conversation. For me, the story is more interesting, not so much because of the conspiracy, but because of the Hollywood connection. I love Stranger Things, and find its storyline to be compelling and fascinating. In fact, the show's original working title was Montauk. And if you've seen the show, it's not difficult to see the connection between the Montauk Project and the experiments at Hawkins National Laboratory. But do I think Preston Nichols is telling the truth about the Montauk Project? I don't know. I think it's plausible. But I also think it's entirely fiction. And that in-between space leaves enough room for the conspiracy theory to grow. As we close this episode of the Red Treehouse, we're left with these lingering questions. Was the United States government really conducting top-secret tests on unsuspecting subjects? Or is this another case of a conspiracy theory gone wild? I've shared the details. Now you decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Thanks for joining me in the Red Treehouse.